Hi, welcome to Real Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager.
And I'm Brian Michael. That clip you saw at the top of the show is from Jeff Nichols' new film, Loving. This tells the story of the loving couple who were married in the late 50s and had to go all the way to the Supreme Court in order to live in Virginia, where interracial couples are illegal. Oof, that's a big sentence. And this is a small, intimate movie with a lot of impact. Jeff Nichols has become a quick favorite here on the show, certainly, since I saw him since his first film, Shotgun Stories. And he always tells these little stories of people in the heartland of America. And this one is a very well-known story, obviously, but he brings so much life to this because even though we know what happens in the beginning, we know what happens in the middle, and we know what happens at the end, watching this journey and just the way this story unfolds so beautifully. And Joel Edgerton, who I'm becoming such a big fan of since Warrior and Midnight Special and a few other films, he just really commands the space without bringing a lot of attention to himself. There's lots of close-ups on him. There's lots of movements. He doesn't speak up, much at all. It is not. Michael Shannon's in this movie for just a second, and I'm a big fan of Michael Shannon, but we really needed the quietness of someone like Joel Edgerton in this film. And not for 1 second do I doubt their relationship with one another. They're a very loving, I know the pun, a loving couple who, very much in real life, stood the test of time without being, they could have easily been grandstanding and saying, hey, this is our marriage, we're doing this, da da da. They didn't want to go to the Supreme Court. They didn't want the attention. They just wanted to go home.
Right.
And because of their marriage, they were kicked out of the state for 25 years, only to be able to come back in individually.
20, yeah, when they were arrested, it was supposed to be 25 years. Yeah.
And so, and I just absolutely just love the quiet of this movie and how it just unfolds just beautifully. It's a great film.
And Jeff Nichols is one of those directors. He really, all of his films have been, in the South and in rural areas for the most part. He's very interested in the lives of rural people, and I think that, that's probably one of the things he was attracted to with the Loving story, because they could have just moved to D.C., which is probably what a lot of interracial couples might have done, or gone up north where they could have lived. But Mildred Loving in particular is very unhappy when they go to the city. She really wants to raise her family near her family, which should be her right, as an American citizen, is to raise her family, and be near her family and raise her children the way she wants to. And she's forced out of her home state of Virginia by this law. And so it really captures, the turmoil that causes with their marriage. And, they stay, a very steadfast couple, but it's obviously very hard, particularly on her, who stays home with the kids. He goes off to work. So both of the main actors, Joel Edgerton and Ruth Negga, who plays Mildred, and her I wasn't very familiar with. As you mentioned, we've seen him in some other films, including Jeff Nichols' other very good film, Midnight Special. I hadn't seen her as much, but she's also quite good. Very different personalities. He's very introverted, very quiet, says very little, which seems very much like the real Richard Loving. We're going to review the documentary later on in the show. We got to see real footage of him, and I think Joel Edgerton really captured sort of that. He's just one of these Southern guys. He's just very, hardworking, resolute, and he just loves his wife, and he just wants to be able to live in peace.
And it's interesting because when she speaks, once she realizes the spotlight's on them, she doesn't grandstand, but when she speaks with purpose.
Right.
And they show her outside of the courtroom, as we also saw in the documentary, where she says, well, I'm full of hope. I know that this is going to be, she speaks in these nice little, I hate to say sound bites, not that these lines are fed to her, but she speaks very much from the heart.
She's very eloquent.
And of course they'll turn to him and he's like, well, I ain't got much to say. And,
but he just sort of grunts or doesn't say.
I love my wife, which was amazing and fantastic
Or they
trailer.
asked him, do you have anything to say about the Supreme Court? So, nope. I don't have anything to say. He just doesn't. Yeah, he's very, man, a few words. She's very eloquent and much more articulate, and sort of becomes, reluctantly sort of the spokesperson.
They do
for the
such
couple.
a good job, putting things in danger. Jeff Nichols and Shotgun Stories especially, or Midnight Special, when these people are on the run and you feel, very much they're in danger. When they come back into town, when they come back home, because they wanted to have his mother, get help with the birthing of their child, they come back into town, and that is so intense. There's no special effects. It's just them driving. They're switching cars. Cars are coming on the other side of the highway while they're pulled over, and you watch them and you watch the car go all the way down, and he's looking in the rearview mirror, and you can see over his shoulder, and you wait till the red lights disappear. Okay, we're good. Because the entire time I'm like, oh my gosh, we're going to get in trouble.
Right, he knows how to build tension as a director with
does.
very little. Yeah.
And such a, what is this, his fourth or fifth film? This is such sure filmmaking. I mean, he shot right out of the cannon with Shotgun Stories, which is in my top 10, with just such a assured sense of pacing, assured sense of self and the storytelling. I mean, he's just an incredible filmmaker, and I think he's finally getting the notice that he deserves.
Right, yeah, Shotgun Stories. Let's see what else. Take Shelter, which is a great film.
Yes.
Midnight Special, I'm missing one in there.
Mud,
yes, thank you, which
Another
I also
fantastic
loved.
film.
Yeah, which I also gave 4 stars too.
He hasn't made a bad film yet, and I think when he does, it might be just because he really goes ambitious. That may work for some, and may not work for others. That's my guess. I'm going to predict that.
Okay, great.
Okay, so speaking of favorite directors, one of my favorite directors is, we have it written down as Park Chan-wook, but I've always thought it was Chan-wook Park. Doesn't really matter. The man's a genius filmmaker. He did the Vengeance trilogy, one of my all-time favorite trilogies, including Old Boy, one of my all-time favorite films. This is The Handmaiden, and this tells of a couple of a con man and a con woman who decide to trick an heiress by doing a love scam and then trying to steal her money. This is I will warn you now, it is a 2.5-hour movie, Angela. Goes by like an hour and a half. It is told in 3 different parts, where we get to see the story told one way, and then we get to see the story told again from someone else's perspective, which is absolutely fantastic, because in the first part of the story, it had me hook, line, and sinker. The second part of the story, it looked like people were being dismayed a different way, and I was absolutely heartbroken in the second part of the movie.
Second part, yeah.
And I thought, please don't let it. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I fell for this.
If it ended that way,
I did this. And then the third part is just, it's an absolutely amazing film. So amazing, my top spot, which was held by Hell or High Water, I do not know what is my #1 film. I got to wait and weigh this out to see who wins, because I absolutely love this film. Just from beginning to end, it's an absolutely fantastic looking film. It's a beautiful looking film. It's so well acted. It's so well written. It's based on a book. Yay! And I just absolutely love this. Now, there is the one thing that is a grown-up film. It is for grown-ups. There's some very explicit sexual situations that are shown between women, and people hate that, by the way. But that's the way Chan-wook Park has always been. Certain movie like Thirst. But this is just an amazing film. You please tell me you're giving this 4 stars. I am going to.
Are you going to walk out if I didn't give it 4 stars?
Oh my God, 3.5 stars is nowhere near.
No,
worthy.
It's 4-star film.
Okay.
I don't always agree with you on that, but I am a fan of his films, as you know. Maybe not my favorite filmmaker like yours, one of your favorite filmmakers.
Oh, man. Love
So this might be your #1 movie. It's tied right now for first place with Hell or High Water.
Well, there's 3 movies that are. This year I'm going to have to keep you guessing, because usually I'll tell you this is the best film of the year. It's not going to be top. This year I'm like,
yeah, this is a very good film. This wouldn't probably be my #1, but it's definitely a 4-star film. You're right. That second, it's told in these 3 different stories. This is sort of a year for 3s. It's interesting because Moonlight has the 3 chapters of his life, and this is a 3.
Right.
After the end of the second one, I was ready, like, oh, he better turn this, And it's funny because usually I'm not someone that says I need a happy ending, but it showed you how much I was starting to care about these characters, and particularly the main relationship in this film, without giving too much away, that I was going to be really upset if it ended at the second half.
Right.
So I'm glad it kept going. I agree that it didn't feel long. And so
it did
it's 2.5
not.
hour film. It doesn't feel 2.5 hours.
It really thought maybe it was an hour and 45.
It's gorgeously photographed. If you were a fan of just photography, period, I wouldn't even say cinematography. If you just love framed, beautiful shots. Every single shot. The costumes are beautiful. I mean, he kind of goes with a little bit of that thing you might see in a Victorian period piece or a Merchant Ivory film, but he updates it, to South Korea during this period. So it's more updated. It's not actually in the Victorian era, but there's these elements of Victorian, because the book is set in the Victorian era. The set is the novel is a Victorian crime novel, where particularly the character of the uncle feels like something out of, kind of this like sick, twisted creature that would have come out of
with a black tongue from the ink of the books that he's forged, and has this young and raises his niece to read these very explicit erotic books to these other men, because what he does is he sells the copies of these books, but actually they're forges. But when she reads those stories, I mean, the theater gets really, really quiet. Not only in the movie, but in the theater I was at. Everyone was very still and very quiet, and it was it's just captivating. You know,
Yeah.
whether or not it's sexual, it's just that it's just done so incredibly well.
I'd say it's more
just
sensual. I
amazing.
mean, obviously, it's a very explicit film, but it's very sensual. There's just a lot of sensuality in the film, and you don't really. I really appreciate that about his movies because you don't see that much in modern filmmaking. You have someone you mentioned.
Correct.
You know, later on we're going to be talking about Brian De Palma. Later on in the show. Now that's a filmmaker who I think of much more makes sexual films, but I would not say his films are very sensual.
No.
This is very sensual, and there's a huge difference.
Yeah,
so I can't say enough about it. All the whole cast, just beautifully played across the board, including the creepy uncle. I mean, they're just great performances.
I dare you ignore the octopus in this movie. What's going on with the octopus, man? You'll know what I mean when you see the film.
Well, isn't that one of his signature things? Isn't that in all of his films?
Oh my gosh! Well, that big, but it was in the background, and I thought, what are we gonna do? What's going? What? Oh no!
We never found out what he was going to do with that, but I'm sure it wasn't going to be good. Okay, so 4 stars, 2 4-star films. You could tell it must be that time of year.
It is.
It's
beginning to look a lot like
awards.
Christmas.
Yes, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. Okay, so we'll move on to our next movie, which is the documentary The Loving Story from 2011. And actually, the filmmaker here, Nancy Bursky, I think I might be saying her name wrong, is actually credited as a screenwriter on Jeff Nichols' film that we reviewed earlier on the fictional version. And you could see why. The documentary. You know, it tells the story of the loving couple and the Supreme Court case that ensued when they wanted to stay in their home state of Virginia. The documentary is very different from the fictional film. I think it's definitely worth seeing. The fictional film that Jeff Nichols did is much more focused on the couple and their lives and their love and their home and their friends, and I liked that. The documentary, I think, would satisfy some of the people, and one of our friends, Scott, you know, he wished there was more of the Supreme Court stuff in the fictional film. So if you want that, this is the movie to watch because they get a lot more into the Supreme Court case. The lawyers that were actually helping the Lovings are still alive, so they interview them and they're able to talk about how they got this to the Supreme Court, sort of, you know, the different, you know, legal maneuvers that they went through. So there's a lot more of that in this. But you also get to see the real couple as well, and it isn't phenomenal how much. And they don't really look like the actors playing them in the movie. But I feel like they captured the essence of them. You know, she is elegant and articulate in, you know, the real life footage. He is much more quiet, withdrawn, gruff, you know. So they really captured, I think, a lot of the essence.
You know, my first thought was, you know, if you watch the documentary, whether you see before or after the movie, you're going to worry about them maybe if they were doing an impression. You know, something like, you know, that I hate, that's what I hate about movies where, you know, Jamie Foxx, for me, does an impression of Ray Charles in Ray. He didn't become that character, whereas this is a very complimentary. You see them both, and they do. It is interesting how the documentary is, you know, concentrates on the court, so you can get both the best of both worlds. When I saw them in the documentary, because we saw that second, I can't help but just thinking, you know, because now I felt as though I knew them more and better because of the backstory, because I've seen them in their home life in the movie, and I loved that about that. I was worried about it maybe stealing a little bit from their performances, because that maybe, you know, if they watch this documentary and we're, you know, just kind of working on the mannerisms, and it didn't. They really feel in the movie the Loving movie, that they really made the characters themselves. Then you see the documentary and you're like, you know what, that's not very far from it. They did a really good job, but they made it themselves.
But it's not an impression. Yeah, they were really inhabiting.
It's not an impression, and it certainly didn't insult the characters or their legacy of what they did. Again, though, we do get to see in the documentary, you know, yet again how they just loved each other and they just wanted to go home. I absolutely love that. The lawyers, of course, were just like, oh my God, this is the Supreme Court. You get 1 in 400 cases get to do this. This is a big moment, and I was up there and I'm sweating, and, you know, to the lawyers and everyone else, it's a very big deal. To them, they were just like, we just want to go home. I love her. I love him, and let's just do this. And when they have them speak, again, she's very eloquent. She's a few words, and he just kind of, no, thank you. No, please. He
wasn't,
very
in particular,
uncomfortable.
Richard Loving was not that interested in going to the Supreme Court. He didn't really want to become a media superstar.
He just wanted to talk to the judge that had the ruling originally.
He just said, let's just work this out with the local judge. Just let them.
So I want to go home.
Leave us alone. Just tell them we won't bother anyone if they just let us slide through. And they're like, it's not going to be that simple. This has become like a big deal now, so you can't do that. So, and I think in the documentary here, you know, they don't have the great tools that, of course, Jeff Nichols has to show the home life and all these things. But he has some moments. You get to see the kids and you know, Mildred Loving getting the kids ready, you know, tying or putting her daughter's shoe on, just doing the everyday things that families do. And they
just
think
like everybody else.
Right.
Wow, imagine that.
So she's lucky that they were actually, in a way, well documented at the time, of course, because of the case. There was some photographers and videographers, so she has this footage to draw from because, you know, both of the Lovings, you know, were not available by the time the documentary was, you know, made. I'm not giving anything away by that, you know, it's an easy thing. Yeah, so it's, yes, definitely worth seeing still, though.
Yeah.
And it kind of does. It's nice that he didn't just make the same film, you know, that the documentary was. So.
And it's 117 minutes. You know.
It's very short.
That's how I got Angela to watch it. I was like, yeah, 117 minutes. Come on, it's on HBO. Let's go.
So speaking of documentaries, this is our next one, which is her Fresh Pics. Those are my picks. These are some of the critically acclaimed movies from this year that we're trying to catch up on. And this one is De Palma. And as you might guess from the title, this is a documentary detailing the career and vision of filmmaker Brian De Palma. And the film was actually made, interestingly enough, directed by two filmmakers. Well, one for sure, Noah Baumbach, and then Jake Paltrow, who I believe is Gwyneth's brother. So just totally random factoid, because Noah Baumbach does not seem like a director who would be into De Palma. His films are very different. So that was just sort of an odd little fact. But yeah, you know, I'm not, we'll be doing our pop quiz later where people will be talking about their favorite De Palma films. He's not by any means one of my favorite filmmakers. I've enjoyed quite a few of his films. I have issues with some of his films.
Sure.
You know, but I think what I liked about this movie is how brutally honest he is, and it's wonderful to watch a film. If you're a film buff, this is sort of a must-see, because they go through his whole career step by step, and he really gets into, this is where things went wrong here, or this is what went wrong with this studio deal, and oh, I screwed up here. And he also talks very honestly about sometimes when he compromised, when he shouldn't have. With the studios. Bonfire of Vanity sounds like one where, you know, he made a lot of compromises, and it probably didn't actually help because it was a bomb anyway.
Yeah.
And he thought he was doing what the studio wanted by making Tom Hanks's character a nice guy, even though he shouldn't have been. And then times where he didn't compromise at all, and then it still lost, or times when he didn't compromise and then he won, and it just showed how sort of the randomness in a way.
It's an interesting career, you know, if you go by, you know, studios and you know, the money makers. Of course, he's had some big blockbusters along the way that have kind of, you know, that propel, and you're still able to make your movies. Then when he gets his own way about doing things, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You know, he's a very visual filmmaker. That's what I always liked about De Palma.
Yeah.
And though he does show his cards an awful lot, Hitchcock. Hello. Yeah. First thing he talks about is, I saw Vertigo at a young age. It made an imprint. I'm like, no, really?
Yeah.
I'd never guessed.
We never would have thought you watched
Vertigo?
Hitchcock.
No way, buddy. So when you watch his films, yeah, there's a lot of those, you know, the Untouchables, they have the famous stair scenes, which is taken from the Battleship Potemkin. There's everything taken from Hitchcock. There's all these different things, homages that he does. But when you're a film geek, you know, and especially young boys, and I'll get into that why, young men, when you get into film, it's really easy to pull his apart. It's really easy to say, oh, he got it from this one, he got it from this, he got it from Hitchcock. And you love that because that's the kind of the key to the kingdom. That's why I always have Citizen Kane ranked so high as one of my favorite films, because when you get the movie, it unlocks everything. So he's a really nice gateway drug for when you're a young, you know, when you're young and getting into films. Now, if you're a young adolescent boy, these films are really great to see because he has no problem showing the women's form. The opening credits to Carrie, always what come to mind. Oh my goodness!
Well, in any other film, just about.
Yeah, or in a high school girls' locker room, and everyone's showering and walking around completely naked.
In slow motion.
In slow motion.
You forgot about that, yeah.
In slow motion.
And that's why I mentioned earlier in the show when I said Park Chan-wook's film is sensual. I said, unlike De Palma, I would not say
very
sensual.
Yeah.
Very sexual, yes.
And you know, but it was really interesting, like, you know, like Body Double, see, I always get Body Double and Dress to Kill mixed up. It's Body Double that, you know, there's sometimes this choice of lead actors or actor. Man, if he'd have gotten a name in there, it'd have been so darn good. It's just, he has some near misses, and he kind of talks a little bit about those. And then, of course, Blowout was the one that I was really excited to talk about, and he, you know, and that was one where he was like, it worked, this is great, da-da-da-da.
And it bombed.
And it bombed. He had a big, huge movie star, and John Travolta was huge at the time, and it just totally tanked. And,
and he had several like that. He said, you know, with the... oh gosh, the Pacino movie that he said I couldn't have made. No, the other one where he said he couldn't have made a better
Cruising.
Film. No,
wait. Yeah, Carlito's Way.
Yes, Carlito's Way. He said, I couldn't have made a better film. I literally made that film the best that I could have. And it still wasn't, it was not that bad of a bomb. I think he was kind of, but he also talks about, and this was, I think, an interesting point. I was curious to get your perspective. He started talking about, he thought most filmmakers, their a good age is between like 30 and 50 or 30 and 60, basically. And he's sort of saying, even though he's still making films, my peak period is over.
Well, every artist and every athlete will have that peak period. When you look at any type of reviews or when you own like Ozzy Osbourne's work, there's a certain peak period.
I can't believe that's who you brought in, of all people, Ozzy Osbourne.
Because he's made the same album over and over. But anyway, if you look at any artist, or athlete, there's always that peak performance of when they have that, and it's very interesting. And that's why someone like Bob Dylan or Clint Eastwood are phenomenal, because they've had the ebbs and flows and they've kept going, and it's like, oh my God, and Clint Eastwood right now is knocking it out again, and so is Bob Dylan. It's kind of crazy. So that's very interesting for him to say that, and it's hard I imagine it's hard for him to admit.
Yeah,
I like
but
when
he sort of true a little bit, because
he
he brought up Hitchcock as an example, and he said, yes, people will talk about he made some good movies after The Birds, but he never, they were not,
really
but they
good,
were not like,
though.
But they were not like those earlier films.
Frenzy's I disagree a little bit.
You disagreed with them? I don't know. I kind of agreed. But anyway, it's definitely worth seeing, for sure.
Oh, yeah, definitely worth seeing. I think with Amazon Prime there. So our next segment will be the Pop Quiz Hotshot. That's where I decided, well, let's ask people about their favorite Brian De Palma film, because I thought that would be very interesting to get. And it does kind of show the diversity in terms of the films he's made and how many different ones that people have chosen. Kara had Casualties of War and The Untouchables. Untouchables I expected, Casualties of War I did not. Dana, who I asked for his top 5 because I know he's a big fan, he said Blowout, Redacted, Scarface, Carrie, and Body Double. Brian Hart had Scarface without question, with so many good ones, but definitely Scarface. Brenton said Carrie and Scarface. Brian Knoll said Blowout is my favorite. Honorable mention, of course, is Body Double, Dress to Kill, and Casualties of War. Carmen, our very own Carmen here, said Carrie, Blowout, The Untouchables. Do we ask for one, Carmen? We asked for one. She does audio, so if my... And then she said, Carrie, Blowout, The Untouchables, Casualties of War, Snake Eyes, and Mission to Mars? Oh, we're going to talk with Carmen. I have watched over and over again, but Carrie and Blowout are my favorites. Our very own Jason said Carrie and The Untouchables, but he says he needs to see The Sisters. Oh, yeah, you do. That's an excellent one. And then Christina said Casualties of War, Scarface, Carrie. Gary said Blowout and Dress to Kill, and I made a snarky remark to that one, but I agree. And then Sean Ferris, a fan of the show, said the obvious answer to me is Carrie, but I think about Body Double all the time because it's bonkers, so that it has to count for something. So Angela, what is your favorite?
I think it's the same as yours. I think it's Blowout.
Blowout is...
It's hard to argue with Blowout.
Fantastic.
And it's funny because it's a remake, sort of the Antonioni film Blow Up.
Blow Up, yep.
And I think Blowout, and this is controversial, but I actually like it better than Blow Up.
Oh, I do. It's really interesting because, it is a play on that film, but then it's also a play on Ted Kennedy's a little swim there he had. And then, of course, you have John Travolta, right at his peak. It's absolutely fantastic. You got Nancy Allen at her peak, who I've always been a really big fan of. But this film is so smart, and when he's piecing this thing together, because he witnesses a murder and has the audio for it and putting things together, and then the ending, which is one of the most messed up endings ever in a film. That's just heartbreaking.
And he was shocked that it wasn't a hit.
Sad.
I could have told him that if he had shown me the screenplay with that ending, that it wouldn't be a hit.
Oh my gosh.
This is a movie you have to watch. If you've never seen Blowout, I would highly recommend seeing it with a very good stereo system. It's one of the very few films I can think of that's actually in some ways more auditory, very focused on the audio. It's very essential to the movie. So,
which is funny because also when you talk about the audio, I think of the score to The Untouchables, which is a movie I have not seen in a very, very long time.
But it has a great score.
No, I want to go back to Hans Zimmer, I believe.
I don't think so.
No? When you go, that's of his, I want to go back and see that one again, because when everyone started talking about The Untouchables, like, God, I haven't seen it in so long. And I remember liking it, but I don't think I want to see if it still holds up for me.
Yeah, Blowout would definitely be my favorite. Although I am a big, I like Carrie. Carrie and Carrie and Sisters is also very good. Definitely worth seeing. So he's made some good movies, but he's also made some real stinkers. I just have to say, and there's also quite a few of his I have not seen. So. I know. I have not seen a lot of his new ones, like Black Dahlia. Did he do that one? Yeah,
Black Dahlia,
I haven't seen
and
that.
then there's Femme Fatale, which is very
I did not see Femme
interesting.
Fatale, so I'm a little bit behind on
film.
his newer ones.
Yeah. Oh,
So-
this was really good. So I'm glad. Thank you all for submitting
Thank you for
your
submitting,
picks.
yes.
We will certainly enjoy doing that. Before we do the wrap up here, it's really hard when I talk about The Handmaiden. When I really like a film, it's really hard. I just about how great it looks and and trying to give too much about the story away because it's really what I want to talk about. And someday we're just going to have a show where we follow up on these movies we love and we're going to talk about the plots and we're going to talk all spoilers because it's so hard to talk about this movie without giving away the spoilers of how much I absolutely love that movie. Okay.
We'll call it the All Spoilers episode.
We
someday.
are. We're just going to talk about those. So we both highly recommend Loving and The Handmaiden. We both give it 4 stars, so they possibly could make our top 10s. We really enjoyed the Loving story, and as well as we enjoyed De Palma, the documentary.
week.
So go out and look for that one. You can certainly like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. You can check out our sponsors, and also listen to us on KMUZ, who's having a birthday. Happy birthday! As well as we want to thank our amazing volunteers who put up with. I'm pointing at Angela for these on KMZ. And as always, thank you for watching and have a great day and great movies.